At Sunday dinner, my son slid a card across the table while my sister talked about politics, and the rice was still steaming in the serving dish. It was a minimal gesture, almost invisible, covered by the sound of silverware scraping against plates and my brother-in-law's exaggerated laughter. He didn't look at me when he did it. He just pushed the card with 2 fingers, the way someone passes the salt shaker or straightens a glass that's out of place. I assumed it was something trivial, a gym ad, a school invitation, anything without real weight. Only after he stood up to get more juice did I discreetly turn the card over on the tablecloth, making sure no one noticed the movement. Dad, don't ignore this. There was no logo on the front, no name, just that sentence handwritten in penmanship far too steady for a 15-year-old. It wasn't childish or careless. It was straight, deliberate, pressed down as if each letter had been drawn with intention. I felt a strange pressure in my stomach, not exactly because of the message itself, but because of the way he avoided my eyes afterward. My son has always been direct. If he wanted something, he said it. If he was scared, it showed. If he was confused, he asked. There was calculation in that gesture, and calculation doesn't belong to childhood, even when childhood is nearly over. I kept the conversation at the table going as if nothing had happened. I asked about his math test, laughed at one of my brother-in-law's misplaced jokes, served him more meat, made automatic comments about the weather. But inside, something began reorganizing recent memories with uncomfortable clarity. The nights I found him awake later than usual, light spilling from under his bedroom door. The way he shut his laptop a little too quickly when I walked in without knocking. The messages he said were school stuff, even though we weren't in the middle of any major projects. Small things that, alone, meant nothing. Together, they began forming a pattern. When everyone left and the house returned to its usual Sunday night silence, I waited until he went upstairs. I stayed alone in the kitchen, holding the card between my fingers, feeling the thick texture of the paper, like a business card printed in a hurry. On the back there was a phone number and a name I didn't recognize. It wasn't a well-known company. There was no address, just a number and a name common enough to be difficult to trace. I thought about going upstairs immediately and demanding an explanation, but something held me back. The sentence echoed differently the more I thought about it. It was trust me. It was I need help. It was don't ignore this. As if I had already been ignoring something for far too long. In recent months, my life had settled into a routine that was almost too stable. After everything that happened with Helena, the gas station, the storage unit, the boxes that disappeared as if they had never existed, I convinced myself that I needed to focus on what remained. My son, the house, my job. I avoided talking about suspicions. I avoided turning her absence into a constant topic. I avoided investigating beyond what I could emotionally tolerate. Maybe I was so careful about protecting normalcy that I started confusing stability with safety. Maybe I trained my eyes not to see anything that threatened to dismantle the little that was still intact. I went upstairs slowly and knocked on his bedroom door. He opened it almost immediately as if he had been waiting. I asked about the card, trying to keep my voice neutral. He took a deep breath before answering. He said I needed to call that number, but he couldn't explain there. I asked why. He glanced toward the hallway before speaking, as if checking whether we were truly alone. Then he just repeated, "Dad, don't ignore it, please." There was something in his eyes, not exactly fear, but contained urgency, a responsibility that shouldn't weigh on someone his age. I went back to my bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed with the card in my hand. I stared at the ceiling for a few minutes before deciding I would call the next day, from a payphone near work, to avoid linking my personal number. I don't know why that thought came to me. Maybe I still carried remnants of the feeling of being watched since the storage unit episode. Maybe it was just an attempt to maintain some symbolic control over the situation. The next morning, before even entering the office, I found a public payphone still working 2 blocks away. I dialed carefully as if the digits could return something irreversible. It rang 3 times before someone answered. A male voice, neutral, unidentifiable. He didn't ask who I was. He just said, "Yes." I explained that I was calling about a card given to my son. There was a brief silence on the other end, not surprise, but confirmation. He told me to check my mailbox at home that night. He said I would find something that shouldn't exist. Before I could ask any questions, the line went dead. I spent the entire day trying to work, but my mind stayed locked on that phrase, something that shouldn't exist. I mentally reviewed my finances, my files, my digital routine. I wondered if this could be some ordinary scam, a banal scheme exploiting fear. But the indirect reference to my son, the personal delivery of the card, it all felt too specific to be random. When I got home, the gate looked as it always did. The street was calm, children riding bikes in the late afternoon light. I checked the mailbox with a caution I didn't know I possessed. There were bills, a flyer, and a brown envelope with no return address. The paper resembled the card. I took it inside without opening it on the street. Inside were printed copies of digital records, screenshots of emails sent from my own email addressed to accounts I didn't recognize. Short, objective messages with attachments listed. The send dates were recent, at times when I was certain I had been asleep or in face-to-face meetings. The content of the attachments wasn't included, just the indication that files had been shared. At the top of the first page, in plain typed font, there was a sentence. "Did you authorize this?" I felt the same cold sensation I had felt when I saw the boxes in the storage unit months earlier. It wasn't just the possibility of intrusion. It was the suggestion that something was happening around me while I insisted on keeping normalcy intact. I rushed to my home office, turned on the computer, and checked the sent folder. There was nothing beyond what I remembered sending. I checked login history, connected devices, activity logs. Everything appeared normal. I showed the papers to my son that same night. He didn't seem surprised. He said he had been noticing strange activity on the home network, devices connecting and disconnecting at unusual hours, small spikes in data traffic during the early morning. He had started teaching himself programming a few months ago. I had seen it as a typical teenage interest, a phase. Maybe it was more than that. I asked why he hadn't told me sooner. He said he tried to mention that something was weird, but I always responded that he was seeing things, that it was teenage paranoia, that we shouldn't look for problems where none existed. The word paranoia hung between us like a silent accusation. I spent the night reviewing settings, changing passwords, enabling two-factor authentication everywhere possible. I installed security software, reset routers, altered network configurations. But the feeling that I was reacting too late wouldn't leave me. I remembered what the therapist had asked weeks earlier. If I were wrong, what would change? Now the question inverted itself. What if I had been right from the beginning, but chose to ignore it to preserve a false sense of stability? 2 days later, another envelope arrived in the mailbox. This one contained bank statements showing small transfers to a technology consulting company I didn't recognize. Modest amounts, spaced out, almost invisible within the total of monthly expenses. The company name was generic enough to blend easily with legitimate services. The pattern felt familiar. Small sums, repeated, silent. Like the purchases in neighborhoods Helena frequented without my noticing. I began to suspect the events weren't isolated. Maybe someone was trying to replicate a model. silent infiltration, discreet movement, construction of a parallel narrative. The difference now was that it wasn't about an emotional or physical alternate life. It was about my own digital and financial identity. It wasn't escape. It was gradual substitution. I asked my son how he knew he should give me that card. He hesitated before answering. He said someone approached him outside school a few days earlier. A man too ordinary to be precisely remembered. Average height, neutral clothing, nothing distinctive. He said only that I needed to pay attention to what was being done in my name. He handed over the card and walked away before my son could react. My son didn't tell me immediately because he didn't know if it was a joke, a threat, or a mistake. He decided to wait for the right moment. Sunday dinner felt safe enough. The normality of it all frightened me more than any aggressive gesture would have. There was no chase, no explicit intimidation, no direct threat, just information delivered in a calculated manner, as if someone were conducting a parallel investigation and gradually choosing to include me. I searched for the consulting company in public records. It legally existed, active registration, a commercial address listed, but the physical address corresponded to a building with dozens of shared office suites. I called the listed number. An automated system answered, a menu with no option that led to a real person. Nights became less peaceful. I walked through the house not out of physical fear, but from a need to confirm that the space still belonged to me. I checked doors, windows, internet connections. Not because I expected to find someone hiding, but because I needed to feel there were defined boundaries. What else could be happening without my noticing? My documents, my professional history, my tax filings. I considered the possibility that someone was preparing something larger, using my identity as an instrument. I showed part of the material to my lawyer, initially omitting the approach to my son. He suggested a specialized digital audit, formal bank monitoring, possible notification to financial institutions. He spoke of caution, of not making premature accusations. Caution had become too constant in my life. Caution in grief, caution in suspicion, caution in action. Meanwhile, my son watched. I realized he was analyzing me with the same attention I once directed at Helena when I began noticing inconsistencies in the past, as if he were evaluating whether I was finally seeing something he had perceived earlier. There was a subtle inversion of roles taking place, and that disturbed me more than the bank transfers. One night, while reviewing the email screenshots again, I noticed a detail I had previously missed. The send times coincided with specific moments when I often left the computer on and stepped away for a few minutes, going to the kitchen, answering a call, opening the gate. Small gaps, not major technical invasions, but human flaws. That suggested the access might not be remote and sophisticated, but local and opportunistic. Maybe what was happening wasn't a complex external attack. Maybe it was something simpler, closer. The idea made me look around the house differently, not with directed suspicion towards someone specific, but with an expanded awareness of vulnerability. I asked my son if anyone else knew about the card. He said no. I asked if he trusted the man who gave it to him. He said he didn't know, but he felt he had to warn me. His instinct was to act. Mine, initially, would have been to ignore it to preserve the appearance of control. I returned to the original card and examined it more carefully. Under direct light, I noticed almost imperceptible marks in the lower corner, as if it had been pressed against another sheet while still being written. I lightly ran my fingernail across the surface and felt a subtle indentation, as if there were words not visible there, but possibly transferred onto another page. That suggested the card was part of something larger, not an isolated object. I began wondering whether the man who approached my son was helping me or using me, whether the envelopes were genuine warnings or part of a calculated staging. Because there's a crucial difference between uncovering fraud and being guided to believe in one. The truth is, this episode didn't bring explosive revelations. There was no dramatic confrontation, no identified intruder, no confession. There was only a sequence of small displacements suggesting that the narrative of my life might be being adjusted without my consent. The difference now is that I'm not alone in the perception. My son saw it first. He felt it first. He chose to act first. And maybe what unsettles me most isn't the possibility of digital intrusion or financial fraud. It's the realization that when something fundamental begins to unravel in front of me, I'm not the first to notice. Maybe I'm always one step behind, too busy preserving what appears stable to see the fractures opening silently. Maybe trusting instinct isn't about paranoia. Maybe it's about accepting that normalcy can be the most efficient way to hide a rupture. And maybe, this time, I received the warning early enough to choose not to ignore it.